Okay. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Good afternoon. So before we begin our special lecture series, so let me quickly introduce about the series and myself. My name is Tae-hoon Moon. I'm an assistant professor at KSR department. And I'm also leading the Korean Studies Center at the School of Sciences and Humanities. So a group of scholars and professors at Nanjang University, mostly from South Korea, we started this research group of the Korean Studies Center in 2019. And since then, we have organized several events like this one and some casual talks as well. So if you're interested in, please contact us anytime with the email koreanstudies@nu.edu.kz. We will keep you updated about our upcoming events. We have another series of seminars next week and the following months as well. So today we have a guest from South Korea who will give a talk about the South Korea's environmental policies. Well, this series is organized by, again, the Korean Studies Center, but also supported by the Korean Foundation. And thanks to the Foundation's grant, so I can organize several scholars from Korea. So let me quickly introduce our guest speaker today, and then I will hand over my microphone to the speaker. So Dr. Moon, who will give a talk about the environmental policy in South Korea, is a professor emeritus at Chung-Ang University in Seoul, South Korea, in which he has been teaching for 20 years, more than 20 years. And then he specializes in environmental policy as well, as you can see here. And then he also served not just in academia, but also in actual policy-making processes. So we can have a lot of insight from him. I hope that they will give a lot of lessons and implications for Kazakhstan and also your own research and studies. So as you can see on the screen, so he has several positions. Let me just quickly introduce some of his main positions he held before and now. So to just name a few of them, he was the director of Urban and Real Estate Research Institute and the dean of the Korean School of Entrepreneurship and Business at Chung-Ang University, and executive board member of Korean Academy of Environmental Science, and co-chair of Gyeonggi Province Sustainable Development Council, chairperson of Self-Evaluation Committee under the Ministry of Environment in South Korea, and president of South Korean Regional Development Association. And he's also currently co-chairperson of Korean Sustainable Development Solution Network and NGO, executive board member of Korean NGO Promotion and the co-CEO of Environment Justice in South Korea. So, without further ado, I will just give my microphone to our guest speaker, Dr. Tae-hoon Moon. So please welcome him.
Hello, my name is Tae-hoon Moon, as introduced by Dr. Ko, and I'm very pleased to have this honor of speaking about environmental policy in Korea and have opportunity to discuss this policy with you after this session. And I'm very honored to be here and also to discuss this environmental policy with students and professors here from prestigious University of Nanjang University. Okay. Since I don't want to spend any time for my delivery of English, I prepared my script for my explanation today about Korean environmental policy and its role to transform into environmentally sound and sustainable development in Korea. So let me present my talk on my seat. Please understand that. Okay. title of today's presentation is Evolution of South Korea's Environmental Policy and Role of Environmental Policy for Transition to Environmentally Sound and Sustainable Development. The purpose of my presentation today is to examine the evolution of South Korea's environmental policy from 1960s to the 2020s in order to see development pattern of environmental policy and policy tools used, and to see a government-business relationship and interdepartmental relationship of Ministry of Environment within government. Based on this discussion, finally, I wanted to make some kind of policy suggestions for the development of environmental policy in respect to scope of environmental policy, role of the Ministry of Environment, and environmental policy as a leading agent for transition to environmentally sound and sustainable development. To manage time efficiently, I will summarize the changes in Korean environmental policy very briefly. Starting from mere symbolic environmental policies in the early 1960s, the Korean environmental policy has developed significantly, both quantitatively and qualitatively, up to the 2020s. At the same time, economic growth policies established in the 1960s, focusing on outward-oriented, industry-oriented, and growth-oriented strategy. We call it OIG strategy, have been pursued so far. I jump into slide 20 here. This figure shows evolution of Korean environmental policy for last 60 years, actually. You can see the policy types on horizontal axis here: command and control approach, economic incentive approach, voluntary participation and cooperation approach. On vertical axis here, you can see time frame of environmental policy here, ex post regulation, ex ante preventative policy, and further future oriented environmental creation policy. Briefly put, temporarily, Korean environmental policy has been developed from reactive suppression to preventive and future oriented creative policies, and policy tools have evolved from regulatory policies to economic incentives, voluntary participation, cooperative policies, and from policy from segmented and fragmented policies to integrated and interconnected policies. So we have been evolved from this reactive to preventive and future-oriented, and policy tools has been also moved from regulatory to incentive and to voluntary participatory policies like this. And From now on, I would like to focus to explain the current economic environment and the social state in Korea and discuss how Korea's environmental policy can be changed and what role it can play to mitigate the various problems Korea faces now. The government have functioned as a strong state for nearly 30 years, from 1963 until 1992, during an extended military regime. Despite this, the influence of business in this environmental policy sector was bigger than that of a strong government, making business-friendly environmental policies here. This slide shows this slide shows the success story of Korean economy. You can see on this slide that Korean economy has been developed from 1962 to 2022 in terms of its GNI per capita. It increased from $120 in 1962 to 2022. It reaches to 35,000. And 990 US dollars, which was increased about 300 times. And also trade volume has been increased from a mere 524 million dollars to $1.2 trillion, which shows about 20,000 times increase in this period. So amazing economic success has been produced during this time. However, the strong economic growth policies have created various challenges in the environmental and social sector. In summary, Korea can be characterized as having a strong economy, a weak environment, and fatigued society. Although environmental policies have seen significant growth in terms of budget and personnel, they have consistently been treated as secondary to economic growth policies. The government has functioned as a strong state for nearly 30 years, from 1963 until 1992. But as I said, despite this influence of business in the environmental policy sector was bigger than that of strong government. The obvious example is incident. An obvious example of this weak environmental policy is the incident in which the area of Gariwang Mountain in Gangwon-do, South Korea, which had been preserved for over 500 years since Joseon Dynasty and designated as a genetic resource protection area with strict development restrictions, was irreparably damaged to host Pyeongchang 2018 Winter Olympics. To construct the alpine ski slope, which was planned to use just 6 to 8 days, environmental impact assessment was seriously undermined, and the regulation on genetic resource protection forests were lifted, resulting in the cutting down of 130,000 trees, including millennial Korean youths. You can see several pictures here, how big was those cutting down trees were, and they are cutting down more than this 130,000 trees just in 2 days, and this is the slope they were constructing here. In contrast to remarkable achievement in economy, Korean society is becoming increasingly fatigued. Due to the dual structure of labor market, due to the dual structure of the labor market, 45% of women and 29% of men are in non-regular employment, leading to increased labor instability. Figure and table shows here deepening polarization of asset and income distribution. Wealth distribution disparity, this table shows that widening disparity is widening between the top 10% and bottom 50%, with top 10% holding 58.5% of assets, while the bottom 50% possesses only 5.6%. Greenhouse gas emission per capita are relatively high, with 14.7 CO2 equivalent ton per capita, and emissions are polarized, with the top 1% emitting 180 CO2 ton per capita compared to 6.6 CO2 ton per capita for the bottom 50% here. The happiness score is very low as well. According to the statistics surveyed by OECD, life happiness of South Korea's rank was placed between 52 to 59. When we compared this happiness score to the accomplishment of economic success, the result is very poor. In this case, according to a 2024 survey of 30 countries, Koreans have the lowest happiness. The happiness index has rapidly declined, especially in recent years, making Korea the lowest ranked country among those surveyed. Additionally, 2016 survey by OECD on the level of conflict among member countries indicated that Korea ranks as the third most conflict-ridden nation. All the economic, environmental, and social issues described above seem to be closely related to Korea's extremely low birth rate problem. If the current rapid decline in the total fertility rate continues, Korea's population is projected to decrease by 30%, dropping from 51.7 million to approximately 36 million by 2072. The extinction of biospecies is caused by overexploitation and habitat destruction. The rapid decline in the total fertility rate and the phenomena of young people avoiding marriage also can be interpreted as resulting from overexploitation, low working hours, and inadequate wages. Difficulties in preparing housing, which is habitat for young people here. It can be speculated at this point in time that the remarkable successful economic growth has growth to social and environmental issues, which in turn have contributed to the quick decrease in happiness level and the sharp drop in the total fertility rate here. This figure shows causal map illustrating the dilemma of neoliberal economic growth. It shows some kind of theory that might explain difficulties we are facing now. As you can see in this causal diagrams here, growth-forced market economy try to increase productivity to the most level, and increased productivity lower labor demand, which decreases number of jobs here, and this leads to workers' income level makes lower, and since workers have less income, their consumption levels will be decreased, and this decreased consumption level causes decrease in business revenues here. Decreased revenue related to decreased tax revenue of government, and this leads to worsening national finance, and which leads to another problem of reduced public spending, which can cause less income of the society. Which takes another problem that less income causes further less consumption, which make another cut in business revenues here, making a kind of vicious circle here. Another problem is that since business revenue is going down, they try to overcome this kind of reduced business revenue by increasing productivity through technical innovation. But since goes to the capital rather than labor, so labor work incentives and labor's the salary can be further became further inadequate, and this can cause further polarization of income and asset between lower income people and higher income people here. So this kind of new liberal economics growth model may explain all the difficulties this Korean society is now facing, because it has succeeded economic growth so successfully. This successful economic growth many problems which we were able to explain with this kind of causal diagram here. Figure in this slide shows the policy scope in an inverted triangle format from population policy to economic policy, resource policy, and the environmental policy. The purpose of this environmental policy is to prevent health hazard and improve environmental quality. However, these two issues, improve environmental quality and prevention of environmental health and hazard, the purpose of environmental policy is to prevent health hazard and improve environmental quality, but these two issues are made ineffective if higher level policies like resource and economic policies are not established and executed from environmentally friendly and ecological strategic perspective. Therefore, the scope of environmental policy need to ultimately transform into a preventive ecological strategy that influence resource and economic policies here. Furthermore, environmental policy needs to be changed toward environmental carrying capacity approach. With this approach, Korea's environmental capacity can be assessed and economic and social policies can be implemented within the limits of that capacity. This figure shows Sweden's resilient centers periodic measures and report whether the global life systems limit are within safety range or exceed across different ecological boundaries. It is crucial to develop and pursue long-term strategy to build a socio-economic foundation within the limit without exceeding those thresholds, as suggested by Donut Economics here. An ecological environmental strategy based on environmental carrying capacity can serve as an important strategic shift to transition toward sustainable development as presented by the UN as global development model. Environment policy can play a critical leading role in transforming the nation's development toward sustainable development. Additionally, it is necessary to implement a new indicator system that supplements GDP, which is currently the most important information used in economic growth policy. We measure what we value. GDP, which only evaluates the value exchange in the market, it fails to account for income inequality, household labor, education, volunteering, and the value of leisure time. Additionally, increased costs from crime, pollution removal, transportation, and medical expenses are all included in GDP, thus inflating it. Consequently, rising GDP does not necessarily equate to improved sustainability or quality of life. This figure shows the relationship between GDP versus GPI of 17 countries and South Korea. Figure A shows a change in per capita GPI over time for 17 countries, including Australia, the United States, the Netherlands, Japan, Sweden, Germany, Thailand, China, Chile, India, and Vietnam. While there are differences among the countries, a common trend is observed. the many of the GPI of these 17 countries increase until it reaches a certain point, and after which it begins to decline. Figure B clarifies this relationship further. It shows the average trend of GDP and GPI for 17 countries, indicating that as GDP increases, GPI also rises until GDP surpasses a certain level. But after that point, GPI starts to decline, even as GDP continues to increase. This suggests that beyond a certain threshold of GDP growth, the true progress actually decrease, such as quality of life or sustainable development is not increasing like GDP, but decreasing at a certain point of GDP. GPI is decreasing. Figure C presents the change in Korea's GDP and GPI from 1970 to 2014. While GDP rises steeply, GPI shows an increasing trend that gradually diverges from the growth of GDP. This illustrates the point that the increase in GDP cannot simply be equated with an increase in true progress and sustainability here. So, to summarize, the scope of environmental policy should at least first expand to encompass resource management, and second, induce environmental economics and the social policies based on environmental carrying capacity, and third, complement GDP with alternative indicators such as GPI that can guide toward sustainable development by comparing the state of sustainable development against GDP. This figure shows three different perspectives on growth: unlimited exponential growth, and overshoot and collapse, and third, environmentally sound and sustainable development, also dynamic equilibrium state, and steady state economic condition. So people tend to say that exponential growth is feasible, and this usually growth-oriented economic model tend to see growth can be exponential. If there are short of natural resources, market mechanism can fix this because higher price of resources can induce a lot of researchers or investors to improve another types of resources that can substitute those limited resources. Or if the scarce resources price goes high, then demand will be decreased. So these people tend to think that all this market mechanism can cure this kind of problem. So as man's creativity is not limited, likewise, the market mechanism can cure all those kind of resource shortage problem. But sustainable development argument goes to something like this one. There are nothing that can grow infinitely. So to some point, if it exists too much, it is something like overshooting, and after overshooting, the system must be collapsed to desired level, so it can cause a kind of very disaster-like situation to people. So it should be prevented. In order to prevent this kind of overshoot and collapse, we need to move very closely to the maximum point of development in terms of GDP or population or other kind of development to a certain point that cannot exceed the minimum level of safety boundary of ecological systems here. So these three types of perspective on development, growth development can lead to a kind of very serious argument starting from this sustainable ESSD and dynamic equilibrium state in the steady state economy need to be pursued instead of exponential growth economic growth model here. So this figure shows this different kind of perspective of growth through the measures we have summarized just before, three measures using resource management, expanding scope of environmental policy to include resource management and induce environmental carrying capacity approach, and using complement GDP indicators. Through this kind of means, it is possible to propose pathways toward transitioning to dynamic equilibrium state advocated by growth limit theory, ESSD, and the steady state economy promoted by ecological economics. Environmental policy can minimize the harms caused by excessive economic growth and lead to transition to sustainable development, while also addressing climate crisis, widening wealth disparity, and the deepening of domestic and international political and social conflict. This slide shows the Ministry of Ecological Transition and Territorial Cohesion in France. The structure and policy direction of Ministry of Environment can draw significant reference from France Ministry of Ecological Transition here. To look more closely, the main areas of attribution from this Ministry of Ecological Transition, it has very wide range of policy scopes here. Like our country, the main area of attribution is that it deals with sustainable development issues, and it treats territorial inequalities, and also it deals with climate and energy efficiency. It deals with the protection of nature and biodiversity, and also its scope extends to transport and its infrastructure, including housing, urban planning, and development, and fight against urban sprawl. And it also deals with sustainable management of scarce resources here. So when we are transitioning from existing environmental policy to a sustainable development as its final goal, when this Ministry of Ecological Transition and Territorial Cohesion in France can be a very important reference point to consider whether what kind of element we can take from this advanced and widely scoped environmental policy. It deals with not only environmental policy, but also sustainable policy, and also deals with national territory development policy, including transportation as well as housing. So all this construction, transportation, and land using policy, and sustainable development, and of course, including environmental policy, the scope of this environmental policy of France department shows very wide range of engagement. So this is kind of what I said before, environment policy scope need to be expanded to include all these kind of different functions which can be closely related to environmental area. But it's very important point that we can follow to achieve the sustainable development and also state of steady state economics and also dynamic equilibrium state, which is all meaning slightly different, but their heading or their final goal would be almost the same here. They even involved in international negotiation to represent Prime Minister's office. And also they are actively participate in the development research and teaching program whenever it is related to international negotiation. Finally, I'm going to point out some kind of several points here. Evolution of Korean environmental policy has been developed fairly well from both qualitatively and quantitatively. But that is not enough, and as we said before, from the case, Gariwang Mountains case, environmental policy is still lags far behind that of economic policy. So when we are considering the climate crisis with increasing domestic issues and international conflict, it is very time for the environmental policy to change its gear toward extending and expanding its scope to include all the policy that can be affected environmental quality and also moving toward ESSD condition. In order to do that, this environmental policy and environmental administration, which is Ministry of Environment, can be a very important leading agent for transforming Korean society into sustainable and environmentally sustainable and environmentally sound and sustainable development here. And when we are talking about the future, we are actually talking about three different kinds of future here. The one is the projected future, which is a future that is extrapolated on the basis of current trend, which is usually a kind of the statistical extrapolation based on BAU situation. So this kind of future that is statically projected one. The second one is feasible future. This feasible future is future that we can achieve with what we have now. So this feasible future is the future we make possible with what we have now, but the last future is future we want. So this is very important point that are we letting future decide how to live us, or are we going to make decision that you want to make future something like this one, which is where I want to live. So if we make this future you want to be clear, is most important target and vision which we can pursue with environment policy and other related policy here. In order to do that, as I said before, and consistently argue that environment policy needs to be one of the most important and widely scoped policy to make this all difficulty facing Korean society or other similar kind of country which are facing this kind of similar problems need to change its gear from existing growth economic models to sustainable development model. And when transitioning to this ESSD condition, the environmental policy can be a leading agent. And we have three different choices. We've been living in the world of doing more with more. So with more resources, we've been spending more. But this is what we have been making some kind of big mistakes. In the time of climate crisis, people says that we have to reduce greenhouse gases, but without reducing our consumption, it is almost impossible to reduce total amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And so, if you want to make sure that the future is what kind of future, and that future must be a future what we want. So, in transitioning from existing development or growth model to a sustainable development model, environmental policy and the Minister of Environment can act as a leading agent for transforming this country or country faced with this kind of problems need to change this kind of the policy transition, and the environmental administration and the administration and environmental policy can be a leading role in that area. When doing this, it is very important to take a close look of other countries' environmental administration or policy structure and take the benefit out of those existing strengths from that's all what I want to say. And I leave you some time that or discussion point, please ask me or raise your point. Whatever kind of question is welcome.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Moon. We have microphones on each table, so if you have questions, just raise your hand and press the button, which is red lighted, and when it's on, it turns to green. Okay? Anyone has any questions?
No question. How many of you think environmental policy is most important policy? Quite a lot. If I no, that's okay. Economy-oriented society, and this is kind of utmost importance that first economic growth can make people happy, and this economic growth can solve all the problems we are facing now. But we can think in opposite direction. We face many problems not because we have not developed or we have not achieved economic growth, but this economic growth could be or reason or sources of different kind of problems we are facing these days. I mean, economic growth is not a bad thing, but we need to pursue those economic growth to a certain point that can satisfy us to live with dignity, to live well with sufficient supply of necessary food and other stuff. But we have certain limit. We have to refrain from spending too much, and this kind of transition of thinking is one of the most important things. And then, if ever, or most of people think in that way, the policy can be changed. This is not a change that can be succeed by one leader or environmental movement. So everybody's thinking needs to be changed in that way, I think. Okay. Okay. There's a question.
Yeah, sorry. So as I understand it, you mean that the ecological environmental policy should override economical policies. In that case, would it mean that this policy, I guess, measures would be more fit towards developed or more or less developed countries? Because, I mean, not every country can afford to override their economical policies with the environmental policies.
I'm not sure whether I understand your question clearly, but I understand your question is that since economic growth is very important, and under this kind of condition where economic growth is needed, how can we restrain or retreat from the pursuing of economic growth? Is that your question?
Yes, and I was concerned with, I guess, more underdeveloped countries.
Yes.
So how would these measures fit for those countries who can't really afford?
Okay. Yeah. When I was saying the environmental carrying capacity, that environmental carrying capacity has some kind of limit that can carry the maximum number of people or maximum quantity of economic growth. But the maximum number of consumption or maximum number of using natural resources should have some kind of limit that does not exceed boundary of, as I said before, boundary of environmental carrying capacity of this earth. For example, this climate crisis is induced from too many greenhouse gas was emitted to the air and make higher concentration of greenhouse gas among the atmosphere. So, in order not to exceed certain limit, we have to use environmental carrying capacity approach that this is maximum amount that can be allowed to use or to consume, but not over than that. But at least to live in dignified human life, we need some kind of the basic resources and the consumption should be satisfied. So when we are talking about donut economy is economy something like donut, and minimum human requirement should be greater than that, but it should not exceed the final limit of environmental carrying capacity. This is what we've been. So in this case here, this looks like a donut, and social foundation means for the people's welfare and well-being of people's life. All the consumption and economic development should be higher than this one, above this. But since this is boundary of ecological limit, we should not exceed this line. But it is very difficult to define what's the limit, what's the ceiling, and what's the bottom line. But bottom line is easy to find because there is some kind of minimal limit that people should be supplied with food and other necessities. But for the dignified human life, we need to spend more than that for well-being of people in society. But those consumptions should not be higher than this limit. But this limit is very difficult to define, even if scientific research is progressed very rapidly. It's not sure whether this limit is right or not. But scholars recommend that even if you do not know exact limit of boundary, you just start at some kind of point to pursue ESSD policy, and then adjust that a little bit higher or lower to find the final proper point. Until then, we can make some kind of trial and error, but finally we can reach the point where environmental quality does not worsen and people's living standard can be fully met by the adequate level of consumption. So if this kind of trial and through this kind of trial and error, we can start this kind of the policy.
So would it be fair?
I'm not saying we don't have to stop the economic growth. Okay.
So would it be fair to say that more economically developed countries should be more responsible for
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And I feel very sorry that I actually prepared the script, but the file's script number and the file's slide number and my script number was different. So I think I made some kind of mistake numbering this slide numbers here. So I was very confused to move back and forth. So I feel very sorry about that.
No one has any other questions? Any questions? So can I ask you one question? Sure. Okay. Yeah. As a student of political science, policy area is, to me, it's a process of coordination, sometimes a conflict resolution between different groups of people and peoples with different views. So in this donut idea of this approach, so I think it's very interesting we have to figure out what is the bottom line and what is the ceiling of the capacity that we can maximize our happiness or whatever we have. From your own experience of policy making and teaching and research, what do you think is most, I hate to say this, the most effective way to figure out these threshold or ceilings? So for example, we have to use certain natural resources like land, or in Kazakhstan case, we have a lot of natural resources like gas and oil. But we have to, according to your arguments, we have to set the limit. And then what would be the best form of governments or governance that can achieve or that can help us figure out those limits?
Yeah, thank you for question, and it is very important question. One thing that I wanted to reply to Professor Go's question is that this is why we need some kind of different types of indicator that tells not only growth of economic volume, but also tells us or informs us that our quality of life is getting better or getting worse. This kind of information is not provided by this GDP. So I'm not going to get rid of GDP, but using the GDP, and at the same time, we are using alternative measure of real progress. Like GPI, genuine progress indicator, which takes into account inequality of society and the expenses like transportation traffic jam or environmental pollution clearing cost or other kind of consumption that does not help actually improve the quality of life of people. This kind of information is all added together when we are calculating GDP. So actually GDP is inflating its numbers since cost and benefit are all together added up, and even if we pay a lot of money, we use a lot of money in the marketplace to prevent some kind of bad effect on the society. All that cost, I mean, when the environmental pollution gets very serious, people get sick, and we need to pay some kind of expensive hospital charges, then it also increases our GDP. So this GDP increase does not always say that as GDP increased, your welfare, or since GDP increased, your consumption level has been increased, so your well-being is increased. This is not the right way of saying that. So when we are using this kind of alternative indicators, which inform us how genuine progress has made, or how really quality of life has been improved, this kind of information can be delivered more effectively through use of this kind of alternative indicators like GPI. So the first step should be use this different kind of information that can deliver ESSD related information is very important. And the next step is that since all policy need to be based on people's agreement here. So people's agreement is very difficult to make, especially in these days. So trying to make a lot of people to take part in the discussion process, we can help this process with development of information technologies here. So if we use this, the technology to the most cases to take best benefit out of that, all this try and effort can be a part of good help to transit from existing policy trend to a new one. And another important point is that even if I cited the French case, the minister of this department has been resigned many times. Many ministers have resigned from his minister position. Whenever they are leaving their position, they said that I cannot lie anymore. Why lie? Because business influence was so great that there was nothing for them to do for the environment. So one of the most famous environmental activists, Willow, when he was appointed to the Minister of French Ecological Transition Department, he was saying that I do my best to improve environmental policy and the environmental impact on our society. But when he was talking in radio discussion time, talking time, he suddenly announced that he will resign from the Minister of Ecological Transition Ministry. And his resignation reason was that he was not able to stop business demand for the government to weak or to build a certain kind of environmentally very unhelpful kind of policy. So he thought he could not lie anymore. So he resigned. So when we are considering, when we see this kind of instance, he was not only minister who decide from the minister position. Several of minister of ecological transition has been resigned for the same reason. But interesting thing is that the Ministry of Ecological Transition has the third powerful organization in entire French the government. So he was next to Prime Minister position. Even if that kind of position holding the minister was not able to stop ministers' the business influence to the government, to its environmental regulation of kind of things. And so either one strong president or one strong leader can make all this arrangement in favor of ecological transition, or I think this is almost impossible in this democratic society. Instead, when you meet people, whenever you meet people, talking to with your friend or your the family's importance of changing the environmental policy and importance of changing our consumption behavior, importance of talking these kind of things to other people who has not shows much interest in this area, and reducing our consumption ourselves, reducing everything from water to food and all other kind of things. Reducing the consumption is the best way one people, individual can do for the help of transitioning the period, I think. There's not one answer for your question, I think.
Okay, so I think we explained more than we expected. Thank you for your insightful lecture, Dr. Moon. And then thank you everyone for joining today. So let me just close today's seminar.
Thank you.